At 9:14 on a Monday morning, the entire ground floor of Haverson Technologies stopped moving. Employees who had been swiping badges, balancing coffee cups, and drifting toward the elevator bank turned toward the center of the atrium, where a man in a charcoal suit was pointing a finger directly into the face of a young black woman holding a stack of file boxes. "Do you think you can just walk in here and act like you belong?" His voice carried up the glass walls and came back down again louder. "Look at you. You don't even know where you are." She did not answer. She adjusted the weight of the boxes against her hip and waited. "People like you should be grateful somebody gave you an internship at all," he said. "Grateful. That's the word you should be practicing this morning." Nobody in that atrium said anything. A woman from accounting looked down at her shoes. Two men from sales stepped back toward the wall as if distance made them innocent. They all knew better than to cross Preston Hale, the chief executive of Haverson Technologies, a man the business magazines called visionary, and the people who actually worked for him called something else in private quietly in the stairwells where there were no cameras. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong," she said. Her voice was even, not frightened, not apologetic in the way he wanted. Hale laughed, one short, ugly note. "If you people are born thinking you can occupy rooms that were never meant for you." He turned on his heel and spoke to the room instead of to her. "Somebody take this intern down to storage. She can organize the archive. The executive floor isn't a place for someone who arrived 40 minutes ago." She nodded once. She picked up the boxes and walked toward the service elevator without looking back at anyone. Not one person in that atrium knew that before the end of that same business day, the most powerful man in the building would discover he had just humiliated the sole heir of the family whose money kept his company breathing. And when that truth landed, there would not be enough money in the world to pay for what he had done. 4 hours earlier, at 7:52 in the morning, Naomi Sinclair had walked through the same revolving doors carrying nothing but a worn leather portfolio and a plain black coffee. She wore a navy blazer that could have come from any department store, a thin watch with a cracked leather band, and no jewelry at all. Anyone who looked at her saw exactly what she wanted them to see. A graduate student starting a required internship. Nervous, unremarkable, forgettable. The truth was something else entirely. Her father was Marcus Sinclair, founder of Meridian Crest Capital, one of the largest privately held investment groups in the country. Meridian Crest held positions in regional banks, logistics firms, 2 hospital networks, a semiconductor supplier, and a portfolio of technology companies scattered across 4 states. Haverson Technologies was one of them. In fact, nearly every meaningful expansion Haverson had managed in the last 6 years had been financed by capital that came out of the Sinclair family holding company. Preston Hale's building, his floor, his private elevator, his corner office with the river view, all of it had been underwritten by a family whose name he had never once bothered to learn beyond the letterhead. Naomi had never used that name to open a door. Her father had raised her on a single sentence, repeated until it lived in her bones. "Respect is not something money buys for you. It is something character earns you." So she went to public school. She got into her university on her own transcript. She turned down 3 positions that were quietly offered to her because of her last name, and when she finally told her father she wanted to understand how corporate America actually worked, she asked him for exactly one thing. She wanted to start at the very bottom. No privileges, no surname, nobody knowing who she was. Marcus Sinclair agreed immediately, and not only because he admired the request. For 11 months, Meridian Crest had been receiving unsettling reports about the internal culture at Haverson. The financials were beautiful. The retention numbers were catastrophic. Anonymous complaints kept arriving through the ethics line and kept evaporating before anyone could substantiate them. 2 formal reviews had produced nothing but polished presentations and a great deal of hospitality. So Marcus stopped sending auditors. He sent his daughter. At the front desk, human resources processed her paperwork, photographed her, and handed her a temporary badge. The badge said one word above her first name: Intern. No last name, no department, nothing that could be traced back to anyone. 34 floors above her, Preston Hale was finishing a briefing with his directors, straightening his cuffs, and deciding, without knowing it, that the new intern would make an excellent example for the rest of the staff that morning. The storage level of Heiress Technologies was 2 floors below the lobby, a long concrete room lit by fluorescent tubes that buzzed at a frequency just high enough to give a person a headache after an hour. Naomi set the boxes down, took off her blazer, folded it over the back of a metal chair, and started working. The archive had not been touched in years. Whole shelving units were labeled in handwriting from 3 office managers ago. She began sorting by year, then by department, and within 20 minutes she started noticing something that had nothing to do with filing. There were an extraordinary number of exit files. Heiress employed roughly 400 people. In the boxes marked for the previous 3 fiscal years, she counted separation paperwork for what looked like more than 260 of them. She stopped counting at that point, not because she doubted it, but because she did not want the number in her head to become a number she wanted to be true. She kept sorting. She read nothing she was not supposed to read. She simply stacked, labeled, and noticed. Around 10 o'clock, a woman came down with a second cart. She was in her 50s, cardigan over her shoulders, badge clipped crooked, and she stopped short when she saw who was doing the work. "They actually sent you down here." "They did, on your first day." The woman shook her head and started unloading anyway. "I'm Delia, operations support, which is a fancy way of saying I fix whatever nobody else claims." She glanced at Naomi's hands, already gray with old cardboard dust. "Doesn't this bother you? Half the interns upstairs are sitting in on strategy calls right now." Naomi lifted a box onto the shelf. "Every job teaches you something." Delia laughed, a real laugh, the first honest sound anyone had made in that building all morning. "Then this one's teaching you a lot." She lowered her voice without meaning to, the way people do in buildings like that one. "Listen, what happened upstairs, that wasn't about you. He does that. He picks somebody every few weeks. It used to be Marcus in procurement, then it was that kid from design who lasted 9 days. She caught herself. "I shouldn't be talking." "You're not saying anything wrong." "I'm saying it out loud," Delia said. "That's the part that's wrong around here." At 10:41, every phone on every floor lit up at the same time. The notice was short and it changed the temperature of the entire building. Meridian Crest Capital was sending a representative that afternoon to discuss renewal of the Master Investment Agreement, the single financial instrument that funded Heiress's expansion pipeline, its 2 new facilities, and roughly a third of its payroll growth. Word traveled the way it always travels. By 10:50, the marketing floor had stopped working. By 10:55, someone in finance had already said the word layoffs in a stairwell. Preston Hale moved through the executive floor like a storm front. "I want the boardroom staged. Full service, real cups, none of that disposable garbage. Test the display, and if it drops the signal one time, I want a new display." He snapped his fingers at his assistant. "Nobody enters that room without my authorization. Nobody." He came around the corner near the service elevator and found Naomi carrying an empty cart back to storage, sleeves rolled, dust on her forearms. "You." She stopped. He looked at the badge on her chest, read the single word on it, and something in his face relaxed into contempt. "Good, you're already dressed for it. Take the service tray. You'll be pouring in the boardroom this afternoon." He was already walking away when he added over his shoulder, "At least you'll be useful for something today." "Of course," she said. 2 people in the corridor looked at the floor. A woman from legal opened her mouth, then closed it. Serving refreshments was not an intern's job at Heiress. It was not anyone's job at Heiress. The company used a catering vendor for exactly this reason. Everyone in that hallway understood what was actually being arranged, and not one of them said a word. At 1:30, the boardroom filled. Directors, 2 board members, the chief financial officer, outside counsel, the head of corporate development. 22 people around a walnut table the length of a small boat. Naomi moved along the edge of the room in silence, pouring, setting saucers down without a sound, stepping back. When she reached Hale's chair, he waited until she had leaned in, until the room was quiet enough, and then spoke at a volume calibrated for the far wall. "Careful with that. One cup of what you're holding costs more than your entire internship. A few of the directors laughed. Not all of them. The head of corporate development stared very hard at his notepad. Naomi finished pouring, straightened, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Hale said. "Stay." Every head in the room turned toward her. Naomi stopped 3 steps from the door, the empty carafe still in her hands, and turned back to face the room. Preston Hale leaned back in his chair and let the silence run a little longer than it needed to. He was good at that. It was the single genuine skill he had, knowing exactly how long to hold a pause before it stopped being a pause and started being a punishment. "Since you've decided to attend a board-level meeting," he said, "you might as well learn something, though I have my doubts." 22 people watched. Nobody moved. The air conditioning cycled on somewhere above the ceiling tiles, and it was the loudest thing in the room. Hale stood. He walked around the head of the table, unhurried, hands in his pockets, and stopped about 4 feet from where she was standing. "Do you know what separates ordinary people from actual business people?" "I couldn't say," Naomi answered. "Results, competence, value creation." He counted them off on his fingers, enjoying himself now, playing to the room the way he played to conference audiences. Successful people don't sit around waiting for opportunity to be handed to them. They build it, they take it. He tilted his head slightly. And people who show up just to fill a slot on a diversity report end up pouring coffee for the people who actually matter. 2 directors laughed. One of them stopped laughing halfway through when he realized how few others had joined him. The chief financial officer looked directly at the wall. A woman from legal named Priya Raghunathan set down her pen very slowly and did not pick it up again. Naomi did not flinch. She did not look at the floor. She did not give him the one thing he was fishing for. That was what unsettled him. Hale had done this dozens of times over the years, and the reaction was always the same: the reddening face, the trembling chin, the small broken apology that let everyone in the room understand who held the power. He was waiting for it now, and it did not come. She simply stood there composed, holding his gaze with an expression that could almost have been patience, as though she were watching a man dig through solid rock with his bare hands and had decided not to interrupt him. "Something funny," he said. "No, sir." "Then say something." "I'd rather listen," Naomi said. "You've been very clear." The pause that followed belonged to her, not to him, and every person at that table felt the shift even if none of them could have named it. Before Hale could recover, the boardroom door opened and his assistant came in fast, heels quick on the floor and bent to speak near his ear. "They're here. The Meridian Crest delegation just came through the lobby. They're in the executive elevator now." Hale's entire face reorganized itself. The sneer folded away, and a warm, generous, magazine cover smile took its place in under a second. It was, Naomi thought, genuinely impressive, the speed of it. Like a lamp switching on. "Gentlemen," he turned to the table, buttoning his jacket. "This agreement is the most important document in this company's history. I want everyone on their feet when they walk in, sharp, confident. Let them see what they're investing in." Chairs pushed back. 22 people stood. Hale checked his reflection in the darkened glass of the display screen, smoothed his lapel, and moved toward the double doors at the far end of the room. Naomi took the opportunity to slip toward the service exit. "Not you," he said without turning around. "You stay." She stopped again. "Someone has to collect the cups when we're finished." "That's fine," she said. Outside, the executive elevator was climbing. Floor 28, 29, 30. Delia, who had been sent up to help with the service cart, was standing near the corridor wall with her hands folded, and she caught Naomi's eye across the room. There was something in the older woman's expression that was almost grief, the specific exhaustion of someone who has watched this exact scene play out too many times and long ago stopped believing the ending would ever change. Naomi gave her a small nod. Nothing more. 33. 34. The chime sounded. Down the length of the executive corridor, the doors opened, and the first people out were 2 attorneys carrying document cases. Behind them came 4 more: corporate development, a managing director, a woman with a compliance binder pressed to her chest, and a young analyst who looked like he had not slept in a week. And behind all of them, walking without hurry, came a tall man in his 60s with silver at his temples and a plain steel watch. The kind of man who did not need anyone to announce him because his presence in a building was already the announcement. Preston Hale stepped forward with his hand extended and the widest smile of his professional life. Nobody took it. Marcus Sinclair gave a short nod in Hale's general direction, the kind of acknowledgement a man gives a doorman he does not dislike, and walked straight past the extended hand into the boardroom. Hale's arm hung in the air for a beat too long. He recovered, laughed at nothing, and followed. "Mr. Sinclair, welcome. We've prepared a presentation specifically for—" Marcus did not answer. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the room. Not at the walnut table, not at the display screen, not at the 22 people standing at attention behind their chairs. He looked at the people themselves, one at a time, the way a man reads a page. His attorneys spread out along the far wall. Nobody sat down. "Mr. Sinclair," Hale tried again, "I want to say on behalf of everyone here how much we value." Then Marcus saw her. His daughter was standing near the service door with a silver tray in her hands and dust on the cuffs of her blouse, a plastic badge clipped to her collar with one word printed above her first name. Something moved across the old man's face. It was not anger. Anger came later. It was the specific, quiet devastation of a father seeing exactly what he had suspected and hopping right up until that second that he had been wrong. He crossed the room. He walked past the chief financial officer, past two board members, past Preston Hale in the middle of a sentence, and he stopped in front of the intern. "How was your first day?" Naomi's mouth curved very slightly. "Not what I expected." Marcus looked at the tray in her hands, at the cups, at the dust. "You've been busy. I learned a lot today." The two of them held a look that nobody else in that room could read, and the not being able to read it was the thing that started the first thread of cold moving up the spines of everyone standing there. Hale stepped forward, still smiling, because the smile was all he had left, and he did not yet understand that he was smiling at the end of his own career. "Mr. Sinclair, forgive me, she's an intern. First day. If you'd like, I'll have her removed and we can begin properly." Marcus turned his head, slowly, and when the full weight of his attention landed on Preston Hale, three separate people at that table physically leaned back. "Removed? I only mean she isn't part of strategic discussions," Hale said. The confidence in his voice had developed a hairline crack, and he could hear it himself now. "She has no role in, say the rest of it." Excuse me. You've been saying it all morning," Marcus said. "Say it again, now that the room is full." The silence that followed had physical weight. Marcus looked back at his daughter. "I think we're finished with the test." Naomi set the tray down on the credenza. She reached up, unclipped the badge from her collar, and placed it on the walnut table in front of the chief financial officer, face up, so everyone could read it. The plastic made a small dry sound against the wood, and in that room it was as loud as a gunshot. Marcus turned to face the table. "Allow me to make a proper introduction." He let it sit. "This is Naomi Sinclair." Nothing yet. A few directors glanced at each other, the surname landing but not connecting. "My daughter." The chief financial officer put both hands flat on the table as though the floor had tilted. Somewhere near the back, a young associate made a sound that was not a word. Priya Raghunathan closed her eyes. Marcus was not finished. "Sole heir to Meridian Crest Capital, member of the investment committee that will decide in the next 30 minutes whether this company continues to exist in its current form." A cup slipped off the edge of a saucer and shattered on the floor. Nobody looked at it. Preston Hale had gone the color of paper. He was still standing in the same position, one hand half raised, mouth slightly open, and his eyes moved from Marcus to Naomi and back again with the desperate mechanical motion of a man checking a door he already knows is locked. This isn't," he swallowed. "There's been a misunderstanding." Naomi spoke for the first time since she had set down the badge, and her voice was as level as it had been in the atrium at 9:14 that morning. "My father wanted to know how people in this building are treated when everyone believes they have no power." She looked at him steadily. "You gave him a very complete answer in under an hour." Marcus began to walk the length of the table unhurried, and every head turned to follow him. "For 11 months, he said, We have received reports out of this company, humiliation, retaliation, an ethics line that produces complaints and never produces findings. He stopped. I chose not to send auditors. He looked directly at Hale. I sent my daughter. For a moment nobody moved. Then from the back of the room near the service door a voice said, "It's true." Every head turned. Delia Fontaine was standing with her hands still folded in front of her, and she looked terrified, and she said it again anyway. "It's true. I was in the atrium this morning. I saw the whole thing." Preston Hale's head snapped toward her. "Delia," he pointed at her face, Delia said, "in front of maybe 40 people. He told her she should be grateful anyone gave her an internship at all. He said," her voice caught, and she pushed through it. "He said people like her are born thinking they can occupy rooms that weren't meant for them." The chief financial officer put a hand over his mouth. "And then he sent her to the storage level," Delia said. "And this afternoon he made her pour coffee in a board meeting so he could tell her in front of everyone that a cup of it was worth more than her whole internship." Nobody contradicted her. That was the part that would matter later, not that she said it, but that 22 people heard it, and not one of them stood up to say it hadn't happened. Priya Raghunathan pushed her chair back and stood. 19 months ago, I filed an internal complaint about Mr. Hale's conduct toward a member of my team," she said. Her voice shook once and then steadied. "I filed it through the ethics line. I was told it would be handled by an external reviewer. 6 weeks later, I was told the matter was closed and I was moved to a different reporting structure. The colleague I filed on behalf of resigned that quarter." "Priya, that is not accurate. I have the ticket number," she said. A man near the middle of the table stood up next. He was in his 30s, badge from facilities engineering, and he had clearly not planned to say anything at all when he walked into the room that afternoon. "He did it to Marcus Oyalaran in procurement," he said. "In the cafeteria, in front of the lunch line. Marcus had been here 8 years. He did it to Hannah in design," someone else said. "He did it to me," said a woman from operations, and she did not stand and she did not raise her voice, and somehow that landed harder than anything else in the room. "In March, about my accent." It kept going. Not a flood. Havorson had spent 6 years training its people out of floods, but a steady, terrible accumulation. 11 people in 9 minutes. Each one waiting to see whether the one before had been struck down for speaking, and each one, finding that no lightning came, opening their mouth in turn. Naomi listened to all of it without any expression of triumph. She was not enjoying this. She had come into the building that morning half-hopping the reports were exaggerated, that the attrition numbers had a boring explanation, that she would spend 8 weeks learning procurement workflows and go home. What she felt standing there was closer to nausea. Every name that came out of someone's mouth was a person who had been alone in a room with this man and had gone home and told nobody, or told someone and been told to be careful. And the thing she could not stop thinking about was the archive 2 floors down. 260 separation files in 3 years. She had counted them by accident before she knew what she was counting. Preston Hale was still standing. He had not sat down, and there was something almost pitiable in it now, a man refusing to take his seat because sitting would mean the meeting had continued without him. "Mr. Sinclair." He turned toward Marcus, and his voice had changed register entirely, softer, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining a rounding error. "I want to be very direct with you. My management style is demanding. I've never hidden that. This is a high-performance environment, and I hold people to a standard that not everyone finds comfortable, but I would never." He gestured vaguely toward Naomi. "If I had known who she was—" "Stop," Marcus said. Hale stopped. "You just said the only sentence that mattered." Marcus's voice did not rise, it never rose. "If I had known who she was." He let it sit in the room. "That is the entire problem, Mr. Hale. Your conduct was never governed by principle. It was governed by your assessment of whether the person in front of you could hurt you." He looked around the table at the standing directors, the seated ones, the attorneys along the wall. "Respect that depends on a surname isn't respect. It's a credit check." At the far end of the boardroom, the double doors opened again. Everyone turned. Eleanor Vance, chair of the Havorson Board of Directors, stood in the doorway with her phone still in her hand. She had been listening from the corridor for the last 6 minutes. "Preston," she said, "sit down." Preston Hale did not sit down. "Eleanor," he said, "you're walking into the middle of something you don't have the full context on." "I've been standing in that corridor since the word removed," Eleanor Vance said. "I have exactly the context I need." She came into the room. She was 71 years old, silver-haired, and she had been on the Haverson board for 19 years, since before Hale, since before the building, since the company was 40 people in a converted warehouse off Route 9. She walked past him without looking at him, which was somehow worse than if she had. "Mr. Sinclair," she said. "Marcus. I owe you an apology, and I'd like to give it properly rather than quickly, so I'm going to wait until I understand how much I owe you for." "That's fair," Marcus said. Eleanor turned to the room. "Everyone who is standing, sit down. Everyone who spoke in the last 10 minutes, I want you to know that nothing you said in this room will be held against you, and that if anyone attempts to hold it against you, you will come directly to me." She looked at Priya. "Ms. Raghunathan, you said you have a ticket number. I have the ticket number, the submission timestamp, and the closure notice. Send all 3 to me tonight. Not to legal, to me." Chairs shifted. People sat. Hale remained standing for another 3 seconds, the last 3 seconds of his authority in that building, and then he pulled out his chair and sat down like a man lowering himself into cold water. Marcus Sinclair set a slim leather portfolio on the table in front of him. It carried the Meridian Crest seal on the cover, and every executive in that room recognized it because they had all seen photographs of it in the trade press. That portfolio was the renewal instrument. 6 years of runway, 2 facilities, the Asia-Pacific expansion, a third of the hearing plan. The chief financial officer actually leaned forward. Marcus rested one hand on the cover. And then he closed it and pushed it 2 inches away from himself, and did not open it at all. "Meridian Crest has never been in the business of funding technology," he said. "We fund organizations. The technology is what the organization produces. When an organization tolerates the systematic degradation of the people inside it, the technology is a temporary output of a failing structure, and we are not in the business of buying temporary outputs at permanent prices." Nobody breathed. Effective at the close of business today, our investment committee is suspending all further capital deployment into Haverson Technologies. Existing commitments will be honored to the letter. I want that stated clearly, and I want it minuted. Nobody's paycheck is in question this month. But there will be no renewal, no new tranche, and no expansion facility until this company's leadership structure has been independently reviewed and reconstituted to our satisfaction. The room made a sound, not words, just the collective, involuntary exhale of 22 people doing arithmetic at the same time. The chief financial officer spoke first, and his voice was raw. "Mr. Sinclair, the Charlotte facility breaks ground in 6 weeks. We've signed contractors. Then you have 6 weeks to demonstrate that this company is worth breaking ground for," Marcus said. "I'm not closing a door. I'm telling you where the door is." Hale found his voice one more time. It came out thin. "You'd punish 400 employees over one interaction with one intern." Marcus turned and looked at him for a long moment. 11 people spoke in this room a few minutes ago, and none of them were the intern," he said. "You still think this happened to my daughter?" He straightened his cuffs. "It happened to Marcus Oyalaran, who gave you 8 years. It happened to a woman in operations who is sitting 4 seats from you and did not stand up when she said it. It happened to Ms. Raghunathan, who followed your own process correctly and had it closed on her." He picked up the unopened portfolio. "My daughter is the only person in this building it happened to who could do anything about it. That is not a defense of you. That is an indictment of the entire structure you built." Eleanor Vance stood. "I'm invoking Article 6, she said. "I am convening an emergency session of the Board of Directors for 5 o'clock this afternoon in this room with council present. Preston, you will not attend. You will surrender your building credentials to security at 4:30, and you will not access any company system between now and the conclusion of the session." "Eleanor, I built this company." "You nearly finished it," she said. She turned to the room and her voice dropped into something almost gentle. I want to be very clear with all of you. This did not start today, and I have sat in that chair for 19 years and I did not see it. She paused. Or I saw it and I called it a management style. At 4:12 that afternoon, Naomi Sinclair was standing alone at the window at the end of the 34th floor corridor, looking down at the river, when she heard footsteps behind her and knew exactly who they belonged to. Miss Sinclair. She turned around. Preston Hale had a cardboard box under one arm, not packed by him, packed by someone in facilities who had been given 11 minutes to do it, and his tie was loosened and his jacket was gone. Without the jacket, he looked smaller. She noticed that and disliked herself a little for noticing it. I'd like 5 minutes, he said. You have until the elevator comes. He set the box down on the windowsill. I want to apologize properly, not in a room full of people with their phones out. All right. What I said this morning was inexcusable. He said it well. He had had 4 hours to work on it and he had used them. There's no version of it that I can defend and I'm not going to try. I was under enormous pressure with the renewal, and that is an explanation and not an excuse, and I know the difference. Naomi waited. But I want you to understand what happens now, he said, and there it was, the turn, arriving right on schedule. Eleanor is going to burn this company down to prove a point. The Charlotte facility employs 140 people who haven't been hired yet but have been promised. Those offers get pulled. That's real. Those are real families. He spread his hands. You have your father's ear. One sentence from you tonight and this becomes a serious internal matter with consequences instead of a public execution that takes 400 people down with me. You're asking me to protect you. I'm asking you to protect them. No, Naomi said. You're asking me to protect you and you've dressed it in them because that's what you do. You did it this morning too. You didn't humiliate me because you were angry at me. You did it because 40 people were watching and you needed 40 people to remember what happens. She kept her voice completely even. You've never once in your career done a thing to a person. You do things to a person in front of an audience. That's the whole method. He stared at her. Do you know what I actually did today? She said. I sorted the archive. Nobody's touched it in years. I counted separation files because I was filing them by year and I couldn't help it. She let that land. 260 in 3 fiscal years in a company of 400 people. I stopped counting at 260 because I didn't want the number to be true. Hale's mouth opened slightly. You're going to tell me that's turnover in a competitive sector, she said. Save it. Tell the investigator. She'll have the same boxes. The elevator chimed. 2 security officers stood inside it, waiting, uncomfortable, looking at their shoes. For what it's worth, Naomi said, I hope you find whatever it is you needed all those rooms full of people for. I genuinely do, but you're not going to find it here. He picked up the box. He did not say anything else. The doors closed on him at 4:29, 1 minute early, and that was the last time Preston Hale stood on the 34th floor of the building he had spent 6 years telling people he had built. The emergency session convened at 5:04. It ran 2 hours and 11 minutes. Eleanor Vance chaired it. Outside counsel attended. The board voted 7-1, the single dissent from a director who argued not that Hale should stay, but that a suspension pending investigation was procedurally cleaner than immediate removal, and who was voted down and asked that his reasoning be minuted, which it was. Preston Hale was removed as Chief Executive Officer of Heiress Technologies effective immediately, for cause, with all unvested equity frozen pending the outcome of an independent investigation. The investigation itself was the part that actually mattered, and Eleanor structured it carefully. She retained an outside firm with no prior relationship to Heiress, gave it unrestricted access to the ethics line archive, the separation files, the exit interview records, and every employee who wished to speak to it. She published the investigators' direct contact information to all 400 employees at 7:40 that evening, over her own signature, with a sentence at the bottom that people would still be quoting to each other 3 years later. No one who speaks to this investigation will be managed by anyone they speak about. By 9 the next morning, the investigator had received 31 contacts. By Friday, she had received 94. And in a conference room on the 14th floor, a woman in a cardigan with a crooked badge was being asked, for the first time in her 22 years at that company, what she had seen. Delia Fontaine had worked at Heiress Technologies since it was 40 people in a converted warehouse off Route 9. She had been there for 4 chief executives, 2 rebrands, 1 near bankruptcy, and the morning the founder cried in the parking lot because the first real contract came through. Nobody had ever asked her a single question about any of it. The investigator's name was Ruth Ibarra. She was a former federal prosecutor who had spent 11 years doing exactly this work, and the first thing she did in every interview was put her pen down. "Take as long as you want," she said. "I'm not billing anyone by the hour and I have nowhere to be." Delia talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She did not start with Preston Hale. She started with a Tuesday in the second year of his tenure, when a woman in accounts payable named Rosalie had been called into a glass-walled conference room on the 11th floor and had come out 20 minutes later and gone directly to the bathroom and stayed there until the building was empty. Delia had waited in the corridor the whole time and had not gone in because she had not been sure it was her place, and she had thought about that decision on and off for 6 years. "I keep a list," she said at one point. Ruth Ibarra looked up. "A list? Not officially. In a notebook at home." Delia's hands were flat on the table. "Every time somebody left and it wasn't really their choice, I wrote down the date and the name and one line about why. I don't know why I did it. I think I thought someday somebody would ask." She was quiet for a second. "I've had that notebook for 6 years and nobody ever asked." "How many names?" 183. Ruth Ibarra picked her pen back up. "The investigation ran for 9 weeks. It was, by the standards of corporate internal reviews, unusually unpleasant because Eleanor Vance had made 2 decisions at the outset that made it impossible to manage into something comfortable. The first was that Ruth Ibarra reported to the board directly and not through the general counsel. The second was that the final report would be delivered to the full board in unredacted form and summarized to all employees, whatever it said. What it said, when it came, ran to 206 pages. It documented 41 specific incidents of public humiliation by the former chief executive, corroborated by 2 or more independent witnesses each. It documented 11 instances in which employees had used the ethics line, and in which the resulting file had been closed by a reviewer who reported, through 2 intermediate steps, to the subject of the complaint. It documented a pattern in the separation records, a statistically significant clustering of departures within 90 days of an employee's first documented conflict with the executive floor. And it named something that nobody inside the building had said out loud in 6 years, that the humiliations had not been randomly distributed. Ruth Ibarra put it in the flat, careful language of someone who expected to be cross-examined on every clause. Of the 41 documented incidents, 29 had been directed at employees who were Black, Latino, or foreign-born. In 18 of those, witnesses recalled the former chief executive referencing the employee's accent, name, appearance, or perceived background. The report did not editorialize. It did not need to. The findings triggered 3 things at once. The board terminated Hale's severance entitlements for cause and referred the equity question to litigation, where it stayed for 2 years. 2 vice presidents who had closed ethics line files resigned before the report was published, and a third was terminated after it was. And the company, on Eleanor Vance's insistence, contacted every person on Delia's list of 183. Not all of them answered. Some of them answered in language that made the general counsel wince. 22 of them accepted a settlement. 9 of them accepted an offer to come back, and 6 of those actually returned, including a procurement manager named Marcus Oyalaran, who had spent the intervening 18 months at a competitor, and who negotiated a condition of his return that Eleanor granted without argument, that he would not report to anyone who had been in the room the day it happened to him. Naomi Sinclair was not present for most of this. She had made one decision on the evening of the board session, standing in a stairwell with her father while the vote was still running, and she had held to it. Meridian Crest would review Havorson's leadership reconstruction as an investor through its investment committee, in writing, at arm's length. She would recuse herself from every meeting concerning it. She would not sit on the working group. She would not be consulted on personnel. She would not be in the building. "You're allowed to see it through," Marcus had said. "I'm allowed to," Naomi said. "But if I'm in those rooms, then this was about me. And the second it's about me, every one of those 183 people becomes a footnote in a story about the boss's daughter." She did go back once, though. In October, 5 months after the morning in the atrium. The Reconstruction Working Group had asked Meridian Crest for a formal observer at the all-hands meeting where the investigator's summary would be presented to the 400, and Marcus Sinclair had assigned the seat to himself. Naomi asked to come with him, not as an observer, not on the agenda, and not in the front row. They took the regular elevator. She counted that as a small private victory. The building was different in a way that was hard to point at. It was not that people looked happy. A lot of them looked exhausted, and some of them looked angry, and the last 9 weeks had cost the company 2 major delivery deadlines and a customer. It was that people were talking in the corridors. Actual conversation, at normal volume in the open, with the doors of the glass conference room standing open behind them. Naomi realized somewhere around the 8th floor what had actually changed, and it was so simple that it was almost funny. Nobody lowered their voice when they walked past an executive. The all-hands ran in the atrium because no room in the building held 400 people, and because Alina Vance had insisted on the atrium specifically. Naomi understood why the moment she walked in. It was the same floor, the same glass, the same acoustics that had carried a man's voice up 3 stories and back down again on a Monday morning in May. Alina spoke for 6 minutes. She did not perform. She read the summary findings aloud, including the paragraph about the 29 incidents and the 18 references, and she did not soften a single clause of it. Then she put the paper down. "I want to say one thing that isn't in the report," she said. "I was on this board for 19 years. I signed off on his compensation package 4 times. I read the retention numbers every quarter and I accepted an explanation for them every quarter, and the explanation was always that we were a demanding environment in a competitive sector." She looked out at 400 people. "That explanation was available to me because I wanted it to be. Nobody hid this company from me. I just didn't want to know what it cost." Nobody applauded. It was not that kind of silence. Afterward, the interim chief executive, a woman named Adiz Nkemelu, promoted from head of engineering operations and later confirmed permanently, took questions for 50 minutes and answered all of them, including the 4 hostile ones, including the one from a man in facilities who asked, more or less directly, why anyone should believe this would last past the next good quarter. "You shouldn't," she said. "Not on my word. Watch what happens the first time somebody with a big number attached to them behaves badly. That's the only answer that'll mean anything, and I can't give it to you today." Naomi stayed at the back with her hands in her pockets. She was almost out the door when someone said her name. Delia Fontaine was not wearing the cardigan. She was wearing a badge that said Director, Workplace Practices, which was a title the company had not had in May, and which she had told 3 separate people she did not deserve, and had accepted anyway when Ruth Ibera pointed out that she was the only person in the building with 6 years of documentation and a demonstrated willingness to write things down that nobody wanted written. "You came back," Delia said. "Once. Everyone assumed you'd be running the place by now." Naomi laughed and it surprised her. "That's the worst idea anybody's had all year." Delia looked at her for a second. "Can I ask you something I've been sitting on since May?" "Go ahead." "When he was standing over you in this room, right there," she pointed, and neither of them looked. "Why didn't you say anything? You could have ended it in 4 words. You had 4 words in your pocket the whole time." Naomi thought about it. She had been asked a version of this question by her father, by a journalist she declined to speak to, and once by a professor who did not know the specifics and was talking about something else entirely. Because the 4 words only work for me, she said. If I say, "Do you know who I am?" he stops. Immediately. He apologizes, he's mortified, he sends flowers, and by Thursday he's telling the story at a conference about how he learned humility. She shook her head slowly. And on Monday he does it to somebody in procurement who doesn't have 4 words. Delia was quiet. I didn't stay silent to be noble, Naomi said. I stayed silent because I wanted to see the version of him that everyone in this building sees every day. The one that only exists when he thinks the person in front of him can't do anything about it. She glanced up at the glass. I needed the real one, not the one my name would have summoned. Preston Hale never worked as a chief executive again. That is not a dramatic statement, and it did not happen dramatically. There was no perp walk, no viral video, no moment of public collapse. The litigation over his equity settled quietly in the second year on terms neither side discussed. He surfaced 11 months after the report as a strategic advisor to a mid-market consulting group in another state. And then, after someone on their side actually read the 206 pages, he did not surface there anymore. The last time anyone at Havorson heard his name in a professional context, it was attached to a self-published book about resilience that sold, according to a former colleague who checked out of curiosity, in the low hundreds. He was 54 years old and he had been extraordinarily good at exactly one thing, and it turned out that the thing was not leadership. It was standing in a room where nobody could contradict him. Take away the room and there was very little underneath. Naomi Sinclair finished her internship somewhere else entirely. She went to a logistics company in Ohio, 800 employees, no Meridian Crest position, no connection to her father whatsoever. She used her own name that time, because she had learned that the anonymity had been a tool for a specific job and not a permanent way of living. She spent 11 weeks in inventory systems and route optimization, and she was, by the honest assessment of a supervisor who had no idea who her family was, a good analyst and a slow learner on the software. She kept one thing from Havorson. On her last day in the building, Delia Fontaine had given her a photocopy of a single page from the notebook, the page that covered a 9-day stretch in the third year, 4 names, 4 dates, 4 single-line explanations in ballpoint. Naomi had it framed, which felt melodramatic when she did it, and stopped feeling melodramatic about 6 months later, when she was sitting in a meeting at Meridian Crest and heard a portfolio manager explain a company's turnover as cultural intensity in a high-performance sector, and heard the entire room accept it, and heard herself ask the follow-up question that nobody else was going to ask. Meridian Crest resumed capital deployment into Havorson Technologies 14 months after the suspension. The renewal was smaller than the original instrument and carried conditions that Havorson's general counsel described in a memo as unusual. An annual independent culture audit with findings delivered to the investor, retention reporting broken out by department and tenure, and a clause permitting Meridian Crest to withdraw on 90 days' notice if the audit was obstructed. Adiz Nkemelu accepted every condition without negotiating a single one, which Marcus Sinclair later said told him more than the audits ever did. The Charlotte facility broke ground 19 months late. It employed 140 people, and every one of the promised offers was eventually honored, and it is worth saying plainly that those 140 people waited more than a year and a half for jobs they had been told were coming, that Preston Hale's conduct cost real people real time, and that no reckoning afterward gave any of it back. That is the part these stories usually leave out. The bill for a man like that does not get paid by the man. It gets paid in increments by everyone downstream of him, and the best any correction can do is stop the meter running. The last conversation happened in a parking garage, of all places, on the evening of the October all-hands. Marcus was holding the car door and his daughter was standing there with her hands in her pockets, not getting in yet. "So," he said, "after all of that, do you still want to start your career at the bottom?" Naomi thought about the concrete room with the buzzing lights, about 260 separation files she had counted by accident, about a woman with a crooked badge who had kept a list for 6 years because she believed, without any evidence at all, that someone would eventually ask. More than before, she said, specifically because of all of that. Why? Because I know exactly what I never want to become, and I could not have learned that from the 34th floor. She got into the car. Nobody can. That's the whole problem with the 34th floor. Marcus put his hand on the roof for a second before closing the door. Then the internship already did its job. She had walked into that building wearing a badge with one word on it. She walked out without ever having needed to say her surname to be treated like a person, because she had decided in the atrium at 9:14 on a Monday morning that a name should not be required. The truth underneath all of it was never about money or leverage or the size of a family holding company. It was this: anyone who treats you with dignity only after learning what you're worth never understood the word to begin with. If this story landed with you, leave a comment with the moment that got you. And if you've ever been the person holding the tray, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this one every day. See you guys in the next video. Peace.